All right, we're recording. So welcome to Sustainable Red Bank. This is a monthly program that we've been doing for about 2 years now. We've been doing it remotely since COVID started. If you have any interest in future programs, we're doing a movie showing next month. I'm not totally sure what it's going to be yet, but if you when you signed up here and if you opted in, I will send out an email when we do have that firmed up. We do also, just as of today, all of our previous recorded programs are on Facebook. That includes programs done by at least 2 of the people on this call. Roy Meyer did one, has actually done 2 for us, and Blair Nelson's done one for us. So we've got a bunch of the past ones up there on Facebook as well. So yeah, and if anyone is in Red Bank, just so you know, this is open to everyone, but if you are in Red Bank, the Red Bank Library is open, not to the public, but we are doing curbside checkout, so you can still get all the materials. We still have Wi-Fi around the building. We're trying to do as many services as possible, although we can't physically be open right now. So if you do want to take advantage of the, please check out our website. We have it all there. As for Sustainable Red Bank, today's topic is stormwater management in your community. The idea is we have altered our water cycle. The amount of impervious surface cover in our communities is impacting the natural operations of our watersheds. New Jersey communities are experiencing increased localized flooding, and there are benefits to implementing green infrastructure towards community health, such as increased property value. This discussion is intended to kind of demystify the process of how to identify the next best steps for your town's stormwater management plan. So I know a lot of people from Red Bank, I know a lot of people from elsewhere, but hopefully we'll get some good ideas out of this. Our speaker today first is Rachel Dawn Davis. She's the public policy and justice organizer at WATERSPIRIT, which is a locally based nonprofit ministry of the Sisters of Joseph of Peace, as well as a 2020 Green Infrastructure Champion. We have Lee Clark, who is the Environmental Justice Policy Manager at the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters Education Fund, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit that works to protect New Jersey's precious natural resources by raising awareness of key environmental challenges and increasing the efficacy of the entire environmental community. And then Allison Jones, the Watershed Program Coordinator at Clean Ocean Action, a nonprofit based in Long Branch, New Jersey, that is dedicated to improving the degraded water quality of the marine waters off the New Jersey and New York coast. I'm going to hand it off to Rachel, who is going to do a land acknowledgement, and then we will get started with this program.
Thank you so much, Matt. So we are probably the majority of us on Lenape land, but just to open up every meeting that WATERSPIRIT partakes in has. I'm so sorry, hold on. We are going to read a Native American Declaration of Water that was adopted on October 23rd in 2003, Second Mesa, Arizona. And this is called Water is Life. As children of water, we raise our voices in solidarity to speak for all waters. Water, the breath of all life. Water, the sustainer of all life. Water, the voice of our ancestors. Water, pristine and powerful. Today we join hands, determined to honor, trust, and follow the ancient wisdom of our ancestors, whose teachings and messages continue to live through us. The message is clear: honor and respect water as a sacred and life-giving gift from the creator of life. Water, the first living spirit on earth. All living beings come from water. All is sustained by water. All will return to water to begin life anew. We are of water, and the water is of us. When water is threatened, all living things are threatened. What we do to water, we do to ourselves. And with that, I will hand it off to Allison Jones, Clean Ocean Action.
Thanks so much, Rachel. That was really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. All right, so Matt, you're screen sharing for me, right? All right, wonderful. So thanks so much again for having us tonight. And I'm going to kick off our conversation, let's see, by talking about stormwater and how it's connected to water quality right here in our Two Rivers watershed. So next slide, please. So I wanted to show this map just to give everyone an idea of the area of land that we're talking about that makes up the watershed in question, the Two Rivers watershed. So the area that's shaded in green is the Navesink River watershed. So all of that land eventually drains into the Navesink, and the area in yellow is the Shrewsbury River watershed. And of course, those are interconnected water bodies. So I show this map just to emphasize the point that everything that happens within that shaded area on the map is going to impact water quality in our rivers. So whether you're in Red Bank, right on top of the river, looking out at the river from the library, let's say, or if you're way back in Colts Neck and Homedale in the upper reaches of the watershed, what happens on land impacts the waterways. So next slide, please. That is because of stormwater runoff. So let's start with what is stormwater runoff, right? That's what we're all here to talk about. So runoff is simply water from precipitation that flows over the land, as opposed to water that has the opportunity to infiltrate into the soil. You can picture an undeveloped or a minimally developed environment where you primarily maybe have forests and native vegetation, natural soils. When it rains on that type of an environment, the precipitation is going to have the opportunity to infiltrate into the soil. And it's filtered as it passes through the soil, and it slowly makes its way back into the nearby water body. That's in opposition to a more developed environment where you might have asphalt and concrete roads and driveways, roofs of buildings, lawns with really compacted soil. And so when precipitation falls in those areas, it's not going to infiltrate those impervious surfaces because by definition, an impervious surface is something that water cannot penetrate through. So the more impervious surface you have, the greater volume of stormwater runoff you're going to have during a storm. And what happens is that you lose that natural filtration process that nature so wonderfully provides with soil. And instead, the stormwater runoff carries any pollutants that it picks up from the land directly into our water bodies. And that can include pathogens, nutrients, suspended solids, hydrocarbons, just to name a few. And to the right on the screen is a map of all of the stormwater outfalls around the Navesink and the Shrewsbury River. So each one of those dots on the map represents a location where stormwater runoff is directed to and directly discharged into a water body. So that might be an upstream tributary of the river, or it might be a discharge directly into the river. Next slide, please. So this might look familiar to some of you. This is the stormwater outfall at the end of Maple Avenue in Red Bank. So you can see it in that bottom left. I hope everyone's oriented the same way I am. In the bottom left, that little circle underneath you can kind of see that circle along the edge of the river, and that's the stormwater outfall. And then the larger picture with all that gushing water is showing that same outfall during a heavy rainstorm. So you can see the volume of water that's being discharged into the river here. You can imagine all of the pollutants that it's carrying that it picked up along the way. Next slide. So why is this all especially important for the Navesink River and the Shrewsbury River? Well, we have a very unique natural resource, which many people probably realize. Our area contains the only direct harvest shellfish areas remaining in the New York, New Jersey estuary. For that reason, the State Department of Environmental Protection monitors bacteria levels in these waterways to determine shellfish classification. So basically they're determining which areas of the river are safe for shellfish harvesting for human consumption. So elevated bacteria levels mean that shellfish is not going to be safe for consumption. And in 2016, based on the DEP's data, a 565-acre area of the river was downgraded due to elevated bacteria levels. And it's not specifically outlined in here, but it's the red area that's, it's hard to explain, but without using my cursor, but 565 areas basically from the Oceanic Bridge and further upstream. Next slide, please. So what do we do now? Well, we know now that fecal contamination is making its way into the river, and that's contributing to these elevated pathogen levels. And there are a few different sources. One is the more human infrastructure related component. So when you have aging infrastructure that's in need of repairs, which is a very common issue, not just in this area, but throughout New Jersey and probably throughout the country, you can end up with areas where the sewer infrastructure is broken and it's either finding its way upwards and being carried directly into the river through stormwater runoff, or you might have sewer pipes and stormwater pipes that are both damaged sitting on top of one another, and sewage waste is finding its way into the stormwater infrastructure and being discharged directly into the waterways. And then you've got the pathogen sources that are more related to land use. So if you have improperly managed horse waste on a horse farm, or dog waste that's not properly picked up, areas where waterfowl might gather in large concentrations, again, when it rains, the stormwater runoff is going to pick up those pollutants and carry them into our water bodies. Next slide, please. So in response to understanding this news that fecal contamination is getting into the Navesink River, Clean Ocean Action coordinated the Rally for the Two Rivers, which was formerly known as the Rally for the Navesink up until about a month ago. And so that was an alliance of numerous stakeholders throughout the waterways. It was a partnership with municipalities, including Red Bank, and of course, the State Department of Environmental Protection. Next slide, please. And the goals of that program were pretty simple. Find the sources of the pollution, fix the sources of the pollution with the assistance of those groups that I just mentioned and those stakeholders, and then really engaging the community in education and encouraging sustainable solutions that would really help to break the chronic cycle of pollution. So we don't want to do all this work to find and fix the sources and then be back here 10, 20 years from now. Next slide, please. So this one has a lot of text on it that I'm not going to go through all of this, but really the key takeaways here is that the result of this collaborative effort is that numerous sources were found and fixed throughout the watershed. They were mainly related to that sewer infrastructure example that I provided before, so damaged infrastructure that was in need of repairs. But also now we've kind of shifted towards raising public awareness about the best management practices for those other sources that are more related to land use. So what next? Where are we at now? Next slide, please. And so here's what we know now. After all of this collaborative effort, after all this monitoring and source track down, bacteria levels have decreased in this river, portion of the river in question. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough to reverse the downgrade. So that just means we have to continue the work. And we also know from our monitoring and from the monitoring of the DEP, we know that horse waste is one of the larger remaining sources, kind of the one that we really need to track down and hone in on. And so that's part of our goal moving forward, is to address those horse waste issues through outreach and education, continue our sampling and monitoring these locations to hone in again on those remaining sources, and then to continue our collaboration with municipalities to implement these solutions. Next slide. So that's kind of an overview of that program, and hopefully if you hadn't heard of it already, you'd be interested in getting involved. But I also wanted to highlight just generally some of the things that you can do as a citizen to protect your local water bodies. And so we at Clean Ocean Action always talk about practicing waterway mindfulness. And that's simply the idea of being aware of how you're connected to your local water bodies and the impact that we all have on them. So to that end, we have all different kinds of waterway mindfulness education. This is, the first one is a link to a waterway mindfulness toolkit, where basically we compiled all these educational resources that emphasize that message of being connected to our water bodies and how we impact them and some of the solutions we can implement to protect them. So that's a fun one, and hopefully afterwards you can check that out through the link. Next slide, please. And then we also are always encouraging people to be the eyes on the rivers. So these pictures on this slide are examples of water quality concerns that if you were out on the river and you saw anything along these lines, whether it's brown water or discolored water, water with scum or any kind of surface sheen, and then fish kills, I know are a big concern around the Navesink. We'd like to hear about it. So we have a water quality reporting form on our website, and it's also linked through this slide if you want to check it out afterwards. And so that's specifically for the two rivers. And this is just so that we can basically use the power of the people to be the eyes on the rivers all the time. And this would alert Clean Ocean Action to the problem so that we can either go and check it out ourselves or alert the appropriate people to the issue so that it can be investigated further. We also have Citizen Toolbox. Again, that's another link with all kinds of tips and first 5 actions and things that you can do to basically just become more waterway mindful and implement some of those best management practices for all these possible sources. Next slide. Lastly, I wanted to highlight COA's Municipal Blue Star program for those of you that are coming more from the elected official municipality lens. So our Blue Star program builds on Sustainable Jersey in that we are basically encouraging towns who are working towards Sustainable Jersey to focus on the actions that promote water quality improvements and protections. And then you would earn a Blue Star in addition to your Sustainable Jersey certification. So it's kind of just another badge of honor that, that a municipality can wear. So on the next slide, please, I've provided my own contact info if you'd like any more information, and then also Kari Martin, who would be the person to reach out about Blue Star information. So, and of course, I'll be taking questions at the end with Rachel and Lee. So with that, I will turn it on over to Rachel for her portion of the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison. I know WATERSPIRIT is so grateful to be partners with Clean Ocean Action, and I appreciate your setting up everything I'm going to say and everything Lee is going to say thereafter. Hi, Marcia.
Hi.
So yeah, my name is Rachel Davis. I am the Public Policy and Justice Organizer over at WATERSPIRIT, and I started in this role over the summer. So next slide, please. Some of you may know about WATERSPIRIT, some of you may not. WATERSPIRIT has over 20 years of existence here in this area, headquartered in Rumson, New Jersey. And so WATERSPIRIT is an ecological center, a spiritual ecological center sponsored by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace. And WATERSPIRIT's big mission that we are looking to fully express is to hear the cry of the earth and simultaneously the cry of the poor. So next slide. You may have recently been introduced to WATERSPIRIT on this very series. Thank you again to Sustainable Red Bank, where Executive Director Blair Nelson was speaking about eco-anxiety. And just wanted to share because we do have upcoming programs offering up ways to work through the feelings that we have as we do this really important stewardship work. It's really important. So we do have a session coming up. Always go to our website, waterspirit.org, and check the calendar of events because that's always being updated. And so you can find all of that information there. And that last step, reinvesting into meaningful action, you can go to the next slide. This is something that the advocacy roots and history of WATERSPIRIT have really been informed and inform our efforts going forward. at present in advocacy at every single level of government. So, talking about a community, seeing leaders choosing their voters, we see that as unhealthy. And as I've said before, democracy, like water, is fluid. So it really is incumbent, as Allison said, for the citizens to be aware, keeping their eyes open, their ears open, and being engaged. So we do have various campaigns that we're working on, certainly to research and bear witness to fossil fuels infrastructure as it continues to be developed, alongside preventative pieces of legislation that really focus on being proactive before calamities might occur in communities, such as a green amendment, which is at the state level right now, but in 11 states at the same time, including New Jersey. So it is part of a larger movement. And then next week, the House of Representatives will be introducing the Water Act, which is a piece of federal legislation you might be interested in. Mm-hmm. And then at the international level, we are focusing on faith and biodiversity. So that'll be, we'll update you as we have updates to share. But again, biodiversity links directly to reinvesting in meaningful efforts and green infrastructure as a whole. So I was fortunate enough to be in person a little bit last year doing the Green Infrastructure Champion training program, and then moved online during COVID. And so these are some examples of green infrastructure that you might know of, that you may have seen even in your community before. And the goal of all of these is really to focus on reducing flooding and increasing water quality. And so you can choose an amalgamation of all of these to fit whatever property, whatever, whether it be, a commercial property or a school or a municipal lot, whatever it is. Those are the key benefits of green infrastructure. Go ahead. That really do help to meet our goal of lessening the amount of water that is flowing through impervious surface. You can go to the next slide. Thank you, Matt. And so we really want to highlight that green infrastructure, in comparison to traditional stormwater management practices, does focus on mimicking nature. And so biomimicry is the means of doing that, really seeing that the answers, as Allison so beautifully shared, really nature has figured it out. And so the more that we can focus on building these maybe small scale green infrastructure projects as akin to nature as we can, the greater the benefit to the sustainability of the community, obviously the property value. There are mental health benefits to green infrastructure, not to mention the long-term investment that it really is. Next slide, please. Okay, and so again, Allison shared earlier, focusing on the watershed, and something as a green infrastructure champion graduate that really stood out to me was that not only my emphasis here on ongoing stewardship, but the idea of seeing these solutions potentially being applied to a watershed. So versus seeing town by town, municipality by municipality, it might be better for us to ask each other, what watershed are you connected to? And so with that, the opportunity of gathering people together, understanding what the next steps are to, start the process, making plans, setting plans in motion, and then of course, ongoing stewardship will be necessary to have a project like this be sustainable and really just get benefit out of it as much as you can, because you've done that planning. So whenever I think about planning a green infrastructure project or speaking about this, I think it's really important before you begin to really think of that ongoing stewardship piece, the succession planning that will need to be in place as you go through this season by season. There are going to be different methods of caring for this, green infrastructure project, whatever it may be, and that should be clearly outlined from the get-go. And also there should be some mechanism of accountability, sort of co-accountability amongst key people who are taking this on in the town. Next slide. Thank you. And so, Rutgers Cooperative Extension makes this pretty easy to get everybody on the same page, start on the same page with this green infrastructure site assessment sheet. And so through this, you will literally be able to make observations in concert with people who have experienced these opportunities from, you know, before beginning to the end. And these questions that have come out on this forum are really enlightening to what opportunities might be a bigger priority versus others in terms of which green infrastructure project you choose to go with. And so some of the questions are, what are the sources of stormwater and where does it flow? What is the direction and relative slope of the site? What is the condition of the paved areas? Are impervious surfaces directly connected? Are there opportunities to disconnect? Are there stormwater catch basins? Is there evidence of ponding water on the site? What are the utilities on the site? Are there pedestrian safety issues? So those are just a few. And I just want to share, you don't have to be a green infrastructure champion to notice that there's ponding on a site in your community. So you can absolutely please speak up to your leaders in your community who may be, you know, environmental commission leaders, green team, you know, whomever, the township committee, whoever you're connected with, DPW, all of them are going to be involved in this, and it does benefit everyone from being, you know, just being on the same page from the get-go. So next slide. And that brings me to, where do we get this assistance? So the impetus for this forum was really thinking about this March 2nd deadline of the stormwater management ordinance that needed to be updated at the municipal level. New Jersey Future actually really just hot off the presses came up with a model ordinance. Sustainable Jersey, as Allison mentioned before, is a certifying organization that many of you may already be aware of, but all of these organizations work together to help communities become more sustainable and more resilient with respect to our very much here to stay climate crises. And so for this next part, we wanted to run through a tangible example using Red Bank as the municipality and just learn what it would be like to explore the next steps of what a stormwater utility, what does that look like? How does that come about? What resources exist? And with that, I will turn things to Lee. My information is on the next slide. And again, we'll share all of this after the fact. Thank you, Matt. And without further ado, Lee Clark.
Thank you so much. It's just a pleasure to be with all y'all here tonight with Clean Ocean Action, with WATERSPIRIT. It's just a privilege. So thank you so much for having us. So just like Rachel said, portion I'm going to be focusing on is stormwater utilities. Green infrastructure is highly important for municipalities all throughout New Jersey, especially Red Bank. But we have to talk about how we're going to fund things like this. So one potential option is a stormwater utility. So if we can go to the next slide. Tonight's agenda, at least for my portion, is one, understanding what stormwater pollution is. I think at this point, we're all pretty much experts on it. Number two, doing a quick overview of Red Bank and some statistics of land use. Number three, the basics of a stormwater utility. And then finally, number four, questions. So from there, let's go on to the next slide. So at this point, I think we're all pretty well versed on what stormwater is. Essentially, it's rain, melted snow that travels along impervious surfaces and picks up all pollutants that it comes in contact with, and then goes into our clean drinking sources of water or sources of recreational water. So we don't have to spend too much time on this portion, so we can go on to the next slide. Here I provided a visual of pretty much how it works. So impervious surfaces can be anything from concrete, asphalt, your rooftops, anything like that where water can essentially travel along itself and push pollutants into other bodies of water. And as already listed, this can include pet waste, motor oil, most common, and litter. So we need to find a way to pretty much fund a mechanism to protect our waterways from this stuff. And you know, the three major aspects that contribute to this, obviously, antiquated water infrastructure. New Jersey, being one of the oldest states in the country, has some of also the oldest water infrastructure in the country as well, as we've seen in the news. Climate change. As the climate's changing, we're experiencing more and more rainfall, and we just don't have an infrastructure that was developed to really take in all that water. So we're experiencing higher than normal floodage, and then obviously overdevelopment as well. So these are the three main aspects that really contribute to growing stormwater issues and why we need to address it now rather than later. So let's move on to the next slide. So now let's look at Red Bank, the case study right here. Some quick facts about it. Over 76% of the municipality's land use is classified as urban. Over 52% of Red Bank has impervious cover, and of that, 12.7% of Red Bank has road impervious cover. So that means there's a lot of motor oil right there alone that can be swept along into our waterways, into the rivers, that we need to take into consideration. And because of its significant urban presence, that also means a lot of litter as well, and fertilizers that goes on lawns and everything like that that can also get washed away, that are very toxic to the community's health, recreational opportunities, and basic infrastructure that can cause a lot of economic problems. So let's go to the next slide to go into the land use more specifically. So here, like I said, 76.1% of Red Bank's total land use is classified as urban. The next runner-up is 19.6%, which is water-based. And on the image on the right, you can see exactly how the land use is laid out, just how close the urban is to the water, how close the water is to the actual river. And as you can see, there's a lot of vulnerability there that really needs to be taken care of. Now, let's go into the next slide and we'll break down the urban use to see exactly what it is. So this right here is the breakdown of the actual urban land use in Red Bank. And these are actual photos in your municipality. I always like to keep it local if I can. So of the urban land use that's being used, the vast majority, 39%, is registered as high density, sorry, it's been a long night, residential, followed by that commercial. So we're seeing big parking lots. As pictured here, a lot of those toxins, a lot of those pollutants will be washed away in these big, wide parking lots down the drain. And that, of course, leads to the rivers and other sources of water. So how do we pretty much absorb all this SX water that's coming from climate change to really control this over 52% impervious surface that Red Bank has? Well, here's one potential way we can do it. Let's go to the next slide. Stormwater utilities. Now, I know you're asking, what is a stormwater utility? Well, it's similar to a water and a sewage utility. Essentially, a stormwater utility is a source of dedicated funds that cannot be used for anything else except for stormwater, green infrastructure development, and improvement. That's what makes it so great. It's a nominal fee. It's not a tax. It's a nominal fee because it's providing a service to the community. No different than your water or your sewage utility bill. So that's a big misconception that I would love to correct, that it's not a tax. And it's also up to each individual municipality to decide whether it's right for them or not. It's not mandatory, and it's completely left up to decision makers, such as your council, your mayors, to decide what's best for the community, price-wise and structure-wise. As we look at calculation, as you can see, the average price or the fee is $6.60 on average. So it could be less than that, it could be slightly more. It's totally up to the town to decide the funding mechanism, but it's no more than a cup of coffee at Starbucks a month. And you know, if you're like me, I'm at a Panera right now. I spend far more on coffee than $6.60 a month. So it's actually a great investment that pays for itself in the long run. And then the other part of the utility, it's very equitable. It's very equitable in the sense because everyone pays their fair share. The more you pollute, the more you pay. And the big players here that will be paying most are entities that are usually exempt from paying property taxes in this payroll. So you're looking at your nonprofits, you're looking at your churches, your universities, your hospitals. They tend to have the most impervious infrastructure. And based on the kind of ways we can calculate this, and I can go into that deeper as we go further, the burden on the residents is actually very low compared to the bigger entities that own a lot of impervious surface that will be contributing more than this. And the great part about this is completely separate from the municipal tax roll. So this wouldn't add any burdens onto the taxpayers. This is a completely separate fund that can be used for completely separate things. And I'll go into deeper detail as we go forward. But there are huge advantages to taxpayers and to local growth, future growth as well. So now that we understand what a utility is, let's go forward one slide. Let's look at a national level. Best management practice across the country. Over a span of 10 years between 2009 and 2019, we've seen a huge increase of the use of stormwater utilities. Today alone, it's nearly 1,800 utilities that are being utilized across the nation as a way to fund green infrastructure projects to really combat stormwater runoff and pollution. It's a very popular idea, as you can tell by the numbers in this report, and New Jersey can get right onto that as well. Back in 2019, Governor Murphy signed the Clean Stormwater and Flooding Reduction Act, authorizing New Jersey municipalities to create a stormwater utility program. Again, it's not mandatory, it's completely voluntary. And the municipalities that are most at risk, the most overburdened, now have a tool in their arsenal that can pay for all this green infrastructure. Because without this, it falls onto other avenues to try to fund this, usually onto taxpayers, where you then see increases in taxes or looking for grants. And if COVID has taught us anything, grants quickly dry up on the state and federal level. So municipalities need dedicated sources of funding to fund this green infrastructure. So if we can go on to the next slide. Here's a couple of news clips. Red Bank is flooding. It's not a matter of if it'll flood, it's a matter of when it'll flood. And Red Bank is hit very badly by tropical storms, being so close to the ocean, being so close to bodies of water. All this flooding comes onto this impervious surface, as you see pictured right here. When it does recede, finally, back into the river, back into the streams, it brings everything back with it. We need green infrastructure there to really take on a lot of this water, a lot of this rainwater to absorb it. So it's not dragging in all of those pesticides, all that motor oil, and everything else, God knows what's on these pavements. And Red Bank is in the news hearing about flooding. So it's prime, it's an opportunity to see such a thing possibly done here. So if we can go forward one. So I know you're asking, what exactly can this thing fund? And that's the $1 million question. And I'm glad to tell you that it can fund a lot of things. The way that the legislation's written is very broad. As long as the project is supporting a stormwater initiative, it can be used for that initiative. So it can be used to establish a stormwater utility, by which I mean the initial steps. So you can fund a feasibility study. You can fund the initial stages of gathering data. You can fund the mapping of flood zones in your municipality using this money. It can also be used for capital expenditures. So engineering costs, acquisitions, it can be put towards that, which is a very expensive phase, something you don't want to put onto the tax roll for residents to have to pay for. Operations and maintenance. So it cannot own, so it covers the construction, it covers the design, it also covers the maintenance and operation as well. So you can pay for snow removal, you can pay for street sweeping with this, you can pay for the cleaning of your catch basins. You can pay folks to do this through these funds. So again, it's coming off of the municipal tax roll and being used with these funds instead. Asset management and of course, public outreach and education is a huge thing. Funds can be used for that as well. And we can move on to the next slide. Some key milestones. So if you're a town that's considering this, if you're a decision maker, or if you're just a resident who's curious, these are the top 8 milestones that a town would go through, starting from the beginning essential conceptual discussions, then making its way through the mid-internal review process, going down to the public education to educating folks on what a utility actually is, to the final launching of actually having a utility. This process usually takes between 12 to 16 months. But these are the 8 milestones usually that a town would go through when implementing a utility. And the first stages are purely exploratory. There's no commitments. The first stages are purely just putting together the feasibility studies and analytic studies to see if it's right for your town. If it's not, you don't have to move forward, but usually in most cases it is. And that's when people usually decide, let's pull the trigger on this, let's move forward because it's a benefit to everyone. So from here, let's move on one slide. Now, we work with a number of organizations on this, including New Jersey Future, who has an amazing resource, the New Jersey Stormwater Utility Resource Center. This is chock full of amazing information for both residents, constituents, and decision makers. What is a utility? What is stormwater? How do we go about establishing utility step by step? It also includes resources such as case studies from towns across the country that have implemented a stormwater utility. It also includes legal perspectives and cases involving this, and everything that can be covered in between. So it's just an amazing resource that I would recommend everyone here utilizing because it's really a one-stop, covers all kind of place from our partners from New Jersey Future, who are just doing amazing technical work on this stuff. So this brings me to my last slide. I know everyone has a lot of questions for the three of us. I'm part of the Flood Defense New Jersey Coalition. I work for New Jersey League of Conservation Voters and the Education Fund. This is what I do for a living. This is what I do for a career, and I love educating folks on this. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My number, my contact information is right there. So that's everything I got.
All right, great. So if anyone has any questions, I'm going to stop the share screen in a second. And if you put them in the chat, I'll read them out. Otherwise, feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions you have. Eventually, I'll figure out how to stop the share screen. All right. Anyone have any questions?
I have a question. Hi, hi Lee. Hi Rachel and Allison and Blair. It's great to see you. I just have a question, and it's about, and just maybe you can explain, one of you can explain how this stormwater utilities also can incentivize people to actually take steps that are healthy for the environment. What happens if, let's say, I had a big garage and a lot of runoff and everything else, but all of a sudden I put in some green infrastructure and started making sure that the water stayed on my property more in a way that it could soak into the ground slowly. What would happen to my fees? Is there anything that incentivizes me to do that?
So that's actually a great question, Patty. So based on the fee structure of how a utility works, either by how much impervious surface you have, or by how much volume water runs off of your property, you can actually be incentivized to increase your green infrastructure on your property, because the less you pollute, the less you pay. So if you install things such as green gardens that collect, green water barrels, rain gardens that collect more water and produce less stormwater runoff, you actually pay less. So that cup of coffee now becomes, I don't know, how much does an espresso go for nowadays? But yes, there are incentives like that. The more green infrastructure you promote on your private property, the less you pay. It also means less pollution going back into your community, and focuses more on the big polluters and incentivize them, such as your corporations, your nonprofits, to pollute less as well.
Thanks.
We have a question from Kathy. She says, I am relatively new to Red Bank. Has anything been done so far to establish a stormwater utility in Red Bank?
So, I mean, I can make a comment. I'm not a resident of Red Bank, but I know that there are organizations that are interested in pursuing a possible funding mechanism to safeguard against stormwater runoff. So I don't know what specific elected officials or decision makers are thinking, but I do know that many of them do recognize the fact that flooding is a real problem. Many are open to the idea, and many are interested in pursuing what is possible through grants to help fund feasibility studies within the initial area. That's what I would say regarding that. Through more engagement, it would become more apparent to find out exactly what are the next steps for a stormwater utility. But in cities or municipalities like Red Bank, I can definitely say it could be a benefit to taxpayers, residents, constituents, and everyone in between.
I actually have a question. I noticed on that chart you have that New Jersey only started doing stormwater utilities in 2019. Has there been anyone else who's done it yet in the state, or is it still zero?
So currently, there are no municipalities that have started it yet. Unfortunately, COVID-19 hitting when it did just was not an opportune time. It made a lot of municipalities have to revisit their budgets, revisit a lot of their town and local services. But it is fairly new, 2019. It takes time for other towns to catch on, and we are hopeful that after COVID, we'll see more progression, as we've seen in a number of other states. We've seen utilities pop up in 41 other states. So it's a very popular idea that I wouldn't think that New Jersey's any stranger to.
And two things on the side, which aren't necessarily, Kathy, Nancy Black, the head of our environmental commission. She just put her email address in the chat if you'd like to contact her to answer that. The presentations will be available. I will send them out over the email. I'll just use the one that I sent the Zoom information to once this is over, and I will be putting videos of this up hopefully in the next day or two. All right, do we have any more?
I have a question for Rachel. I'll just, Rachel, I think it would be fantastic if you talked a little bit about your experience with the Green Infrastructure Champion program, and since that is available to pretty much anyone who's interested.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would recommend, if you're capable, and I can put the link in the chat, you can sign up for that. This is something that, in the past has been completely in person, and, one byproduct of COVID that is maybe helpful is the increased accessibility of these programs and just the awareness that they exist. And so I would recommend, if anyone is interested, please, look at the Green Infrastructure training calendar. There are upcoming classes every couple weeks or something. And again, I'll put the link in the chat. But it is something that I think would be beneficial to every municipality. And again, I'm promoting everybody connecting on the watershed level, because we can do a lot of projects in concert, municipalities, groups of municipalities, and I've seen a lot of great benefits. And I've seen that is kind of an evolution where Sustainable Jersey is moving along with that. Thank you. Awarding points to towns that do more of the collaborative efforts, really focusing on the watershed being the connector. So I think it would be beneficial for everybody to be more educated about this really very, prevalent problem that we have, right? I woke up this morning and I took my dog for it felt like a swim in the sidewalk. So this is increasingly going to get worse, as we know. And I know I'm preaching to the choir about that, but the opportunity to start the conversation, was in part tonight, to put all this information out there and see what sticks, but really to just, again, make more accessible the resources and the point people who are working on this. And while it is new, it isn't something that is inaccessible or foreign in any way.
Oh, and we did have Blair put the Green Infrastructure Champions link into the chat on the side. And we have another question, which is, if we're trying to get our community to look at this, where's the best place to start? I don't think it's on their radar at all. So whoever would like to take that.
I can definitely start. So, I mean, the best place to start is to reach out to your elected officials. Now, by no means am I saying bombard them with emails and phone calls and all that. But the best place to start is definitely to let them know that it's on your radar. That's how our elected officials work. They only know about the problems if they hear from their constituents. And then once they know, many of them will then address the issue. I see Nancy Blackwood is part of the EC here. So that's a step right there. And hopefully officials like that will then go forward and then carry this idea on to the appropriate people, I would say. So I would, as an organizer myself and a policy person, talking to your elected officials and decision makers and giving them your idea is the first step, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I would echo that absolutely. You know, wherever your town is, there are environmental commissions, green teams. You can connect with these people. They are hopefully already connected again with Sustainable Jersey and working through competing for the collaborative good of everybody having a sustainable community in New Jersey. So yeah, I think that would be your first step, would be contacting and asking the question and sharing, you know, hey, I found out about this on the Sustainable Red Bank series. Here's this recording. Maybe we should have a discussion about what's going on. And you might learn that there are already things going on, which is, you know, again, not a bad thing. But get involved.
Just to add on top of that, this program series is actually produced with Red Bank's Green Team. So I am regularly, I mean, Nancy obviously is the head, but I'm regularly contacting the Environmental Commission for this program specifically. And many of the people attending these programs are Environmental Commission and Green Team members. So, you know, it's not inaccessible. There are plenty of people that are on this call who you could talk to. Do we have any more? Do you have any more questions? Going once, going twice. All right. In that case, I'd like to thank Rachel, Allison, and Lee. That was great. I'm going to be placing a recording of this onto YouTube and Facebook, and I will send out a copy of each of the presentations tonight. If anyone has any future recommendations for Sustainable Red Bank, we'd really appreciate it. And I'd like to thank everyone for their time. That was great.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.